Hey everyone!
Hello.
We are really excited about today's episode, and I'm extra excited because I've been gone for the past 2 weeks.
I know I've been holding down the fort without you, and I've been
Oh,
telling them that you're on a beautiful vacation. So
it
everyone's excited that you're back.
it was beautiful. Ireland is a very special place. If you guys haven't been there, check it out. It's a heart-opening experience. I will just say that. Anyway, today we are going to be talking about what to do with heartbreak, grief, and disappointment. It's going to be a heartwarming topic to dive into. Let's just say that. Anyway, I'm Katie, and I'm so excited to be here with you all.
And I'm Erin, and we're your co-host of the Inner RAE podcast. And before we dive into this topic, I just want to take a moment to tell you a little bit about a new offer that we have with Inner RAE Coaching. So, when I think about the whole purpose of this company, I often start with this idea that, have you ever felt like everyone got the handbook on how to have relationships and maybe you just didn't get the handbook? Because if you feel that way, we can totally relate.
Mhm.
And this is why we
Mhm.
recently developed our very, very first course
Woo.
called Anatomy of Relationship, a Guide to Mastering Attachment. This course can quickly and easily improve the quality of your life and relationships, no matter what relational challenges you're facing. So, if you're struggling with your romantic life, your work life, your home life, your family life, your friendships, whatever those challenges are, this course is going to have a lot of really, really useful information for you.
Mm.
And right now, until June 15th, we're actually going to be offering $111 off the course using the code word intimacy. So if this course sounds like something you're interested in, it would be a really good idea to just check it out on our virtual store on our website. We're also going to include a link in the show notes. And also there's a couple of reels about it on Instagram. And if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out to us, DM us, email us, and we'd be happy to walk you through what is in the course. It is a video guided, self-guided course with videos and a worksheet and slides and all that. So anyway, I'm talking a lot about this course, but it's because I am so excited to just
Yeah.
make this information more accessible.
Mm.
Um, all right, so back to our topic for today:
Woo.
what to do with heartbreak, grief, and disappointment.
Mm.
And yeah, it's interesting because when Katie returned from Ireland, we were just talking about like what would feel like really resonant with something we're
Mhm.
both walking through in different ways, and this was the topic we came up
Yep.
with. So, um, for me, a lot of times I find a lot of healing in thinking of things archetypally and metaphorically. So, tarot and oracle has been a place that I've gone to help me process different phases of life. And so, when Katie and I were brainstorming this topic, I thought a lot about, if you are familiar with tarot, you do not need to be to understand what I'm going to be
Mhm.
sharing. But if you are, I was thinking about the Three of Swords in the tarot deck,
Yeah.
and it's like known as the heartbreak card,
Mm.
and it's often depicted with a heart with three swords going through it, which sounds really intense. Tarot's imagery can be a little bit intense, but the deck I'm going to be reading a little bit out of around this topic in this card is the Light Seers Tarot by Chris Ann. And the theme of the card in her deck is painful separation, loss, heartbreak, an opportunity to heal, shadows
Mm.
coming to the light, and finding inspiration again.
Mm.
And so, yeah, when I was thinking about how do we open up this podcast, I just wanted to read from her guidebook what it is to be in that energy
Mm.
and how to move through it,
Mm.
because she
Beautiful.
articulates it beautifully. So,
Mm.
heartbroken, she falls to her knees and screams to the universe for a second chance. Separation can come in many forms, from the loss of a relationship or identity to the disintegration of a belief, purpose, or goals, separation from what we had can mark painful moments in our lives. If you find yourself amongst wavering realities and losing something that feels near and dear to your heart, know that this too shall pass. This severing, although painful, is a necessary part of the process. Despite all proof to the contrary, your brightly lit future will arrive because of this experience. Tie yourself to the light and prepare to spend some time nurturing your tender spirit. These shadowy times are always opportunities to become stronger and more resilient. So give yourself time to heal and know that you will love, thrive, and find inspiration again soon. And the affirmation for this card or this energy, if it's coming up for you, is my heart remains open and tender.
Oh, I love that. Oh, I just want to breathe it in. I feel like it is medicinal to hear those words, because I think the hardest part I found in heartbreak and disappointment is trusting that it is an opportunity, and trusting that it is leading us into the light, and trusting that it is leading us into our next evolution. It can be so hard, right? Because heartbreak is extremely painful, like that card speaks to, and sadness can be a really big and physical reaction, and it can bring up a lot of strong energy, but we have to meet that strong energy with a softness, with a trust, with a patience, and with real tenderness. And I think, I mean, if I think about my first heartbreak, like I did not know how to meet it. And I feel like every heartbreak I've gone through, I've gotten better and better at learning how to hold my heart when it's broken. And I think truly heartbreak is an opportunity and a gift, because you get to put yourself back together again, and you get to find the beauty in yourself and truly kind of rediscover all that you love from your most authentic, innocent, pure place. And I say all of that, and when you're going through it physically and emotionally, like it is really tough sometimes to hold that truth. And that was something that was coming up for me when we were about to record this podcast, or thinking about recording this podcast a few days ago. Like I woke up and I could feel, I tried to stay out of story as much as I could. So I asked my body, and I asked myself, like, what am I feeling and where am I feeling it? I could feel this like tightness and clenching in my stomach. I could feel this tightness and like almost like a cramping in my heart. And I was like, oh, okay, here's that heartbreak. And then I really felt into it. And I was like, ooh, you've been showing yourself to me quite a bit over the past few days. But ultimately, like, we aren't taught at a young age how to hold our pain. And so we have all of these reps in our body of pushing these feelings down, pushing down the pain. Depress is to push down, right? And so ultimately, like, that's what was coming up to the surface for me, were all the things I was pushing down. And so I created space for me to allow these parts to be expressed, which for me was speaking to it with Erin and being like, I think that a lot of people could benefit from this. And I know I could, just allowing these feelings to have space to be free and to flow. So yeah, with all of that, I think the place that I always start, which isn't necessarily the easiest and has taken practice, is like, what is this pain here to teach me? And what do you need? Like asking the parts of my body, asking the parts of my heart, what do you need to feel held? I'm curious with you, Erin, like what you've done and what questions you ask when this comes up for you.
Well, it's so interesting because when we were talking about it, I was like thinking about all the ways. So I want to answer that question, but I even want to step back a second and even think about
Beautiful.
a lot of times when people hear the word grief or they hear the word heartbreak, right? It brings up a few very specific things.
Yep.
And I'll never forget, like, when I was moving apartments, a place I had lived for like 5 years, and a mentor of mine was like, yeah, you're grieving, leaving that space.
Yeah.
And so what I loved about this reading is that it defines it as the loss of relationship, identity, or disintegration of a belief, a purpose, or a goal, a separation from what we thought we had. Right. And so I think it's that, like, I think one of the beautiful things I'm going to bring into the topic of heartbreak and how to move through it is that the only thing we're guaranteed in life is change.
Yeah.
And change means that we have to release an idea of something that we believe we had, which can be most painful when it comes to romantic relationship, romantic love, familial love, death, right?
Yeah.
But the cycle of life, I think that is actually, even I am kind of answering your question,
You
because
are. Yeah.
when I am met with grief, heartbreak, disappointment, sometimes taking a step back to realize that every day there is a change. Every time there's a season, every time something begins and something ends, it's an opportunity to view that as grief, heartbreak, disappointment.
Absolutely.
Not because I want to look at everything from a negative place, but because as humans, we want to cling to something that feels good, and that thing that feels good is inevitably gonna change. And so, like, I was thinking about my most recent acute grief that I went through, which was the loss of my beloved cat. And there was a quote that came up, which is that grief is love with no place to go. Right. And so for me, one of the biggest tools is, well, let's give it a place to go.
Yes. Yes.
Right. Because if I have this love and it can no longer be channeled into, in my example, my cat Petey, because he's gone. Well, but is he gone? Right. And whatever your beliefs are, or however you answer that question. And one of the things you said, Katie, that is so beautiful, it's like from depression to devotion. So it's like the initial drop, the heartbreak, the grief, I'm not telling people not to feel that, or you shouldn't feel that. Like, I was definitely grieving the loss of my cat. But one of the ways I quickly transmuted it, not quickly, that's not the right word. One of the ways I transmuted it effectively was that I attended this, I think it was a summer solstice. No, because it's still not summer solstice, but it was some kind of like meditation event that I attended. And there was this cord cutting, and I was like, oh, I need to cut the cord with my cat so that I can like grieve and move on. And what I actually got out of that cord cutting was that cord doesn't get cut.
Yeah.
Like, he's always with me.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the love that I had for him had a place to go. Right. And so kind of examining, like, what is it that I think that I've lost? Has it just changed form? And then if it has, how do I shift from feeling depressed to feeling devoted again? Like putting that love where it needs to go. Anyway, is this kind of answering your question in a very roundabout way?
It is. It really is. And I think what's coming up for me, and what I saw when you were describing that, right? And when I think about grief is I see this wave, but not just like a wave in an ocean. I feel like grief feels like a tsunami of sadness. It is like so much emotion, so much water. And ultimately, like, when a tsunami hits, there isn't a place for all of that water to go. It floods. And it does lead to some degree of destruction. And also, in that destruction is when we get to recreate, and we get to mold, and we get to figure out where slowly and also quickly, because you have to sit in it, right? And you have to be able to pull on your toolbox to be like, okay, how can I kind of now start to soak up some of this displaced water and emotion, and how do I work through it? Knowing that you're not going to be able to move through it in a day, right? And so being really patient with yourself. And so just that big wave coming in is something that I really saw. And I think ultimately, like, how to make this most helpful for people, I think would be to just think about some of the things that we have done, like you said, figuring out where you can go, safe places, safe people, safe activities, right? To help this energy find a place to move and feel safe being felt. For me, like, one of the things you're talking about, right, is like letting go and releasing. One of the things that I found is, like, when you're hurting, like, you're not really prepared to let go. And there's this fine line, right? Because you have to feel the pain to really kind of learn from it and sit in its wisdom, but you also do have to let go of it at some point. And that's this whole game of discernment. And so I think ultimately, like, not wanting to let go means you're tightly holding on to a person, an idea, or a dream. And so things that I have found within that on how to channel that what that person gave you, what that idea gave you, what that dream gave you is to write, is to draw, is to take that emotion out into nature and feel where it's resonating. Go sit, if you have water near you, go sit by the water and watch it flow, and just allow the momentum of what's around you to move through you as well. And just really, like we started out with these words, like finding metaphors and words and language that resonates with you, so that you don't have to hold the emotion or the pain yourself, right? Because ultimately you're not alone in this. But when you're in it, you do feel very alone.
Yeah. And I was thinking about, this is the beauty of us, because, you know, my last instinct would be to go and write, which is not like good or bad, right? Like, it's like I kind of come at it from a different direction, and ultimately I usually end up in that place of reflection on my own. But when I first lost Petey, my first instinct was to talk to other pet owners, right? To talk to other people that had gone through that grief and loss, to reach out to my community for support. And what I found that was really, really helpful was so many people had stories about my cat. You know, so many people had stories about my cat that were just really heartwarming. And like, seeing the love they had for him, seeing their grief, sharing that grief being shared, became more manageable.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's taking me into I just lost, when I was on my trip, my horse Hope. And so much came up. But I was on this like cruise, right? And it was like an excursion cruise. So there was so much, it was busy all day. And it was so interesting because this experience and like being in this busy environment took me right back into essentially how I dealt with grief and heartbreak my whole life, which was to busy myself and to distract myself. But now at this new place in my life, I know that I can't do that. And so I immediately was like, ooh, like, I haven't allowed myself to feel this. And so I went and I put myself in a position. I mean, I'm on a cruise ship, like, there's no one there around that I can go and talk to about this. No one knows me for the most part. My grandma was like, you know, off doing her thing. And so I was like, where can I go that I can get into this emotion? Because there are so many walls that are up because I'm not in necessarily the safest place. So I went up to the workout room and I was like, Hope, come on in. Like, just be here with me. I wore my little Hope necklace and I just watched the water. And then I just cried for like 45 minutes while I was on the bike, and essentially like was doing somatic release within my body the whole time. Like, I could feel where the tightness was, and then I'd ride the bike in that spot just to help it move. And then the tears would come and the tears would flow. And so I think back to that, like what you were saying, that was the way that I shared my grief was figuring out a way for me to feel it and then to call in energetically within myself, but then also call in hope. Like, what can I do? How can I feel you? And how can I not give up hope and distract myself away from feeling what I need to feel in order to move through it?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think ultimately it's like, because I actually had a similar experience when my grandmother died. I was in day
Mm,
one of like a 4-day women's retreat.
mm,
And it was that same feeling of like, I didn't necessarily feel like the people around me were the type of people, not that there was anything wrong with those people, but
right,
they weren't necessarily the people I wanted to go grieve, my 97-year-old grandmother that was one of
right.
my closer family relationships. And I couldn't exactly like just run off and spend the whole day connecting with people I trust. I mean I could call some people, but there wasn't great service and
Right.
out in the woods. And um so yeah, instead I kind of just like I did share it with some people on like kind of a surface level, but mostly I just sat with myself and let
Mm,
myself feel while being immersed in this environment,
mm,
and kind of just giving myself permission to be exactly where I was, which is
yep.
like, I was not going to be the bubbly, socialite who's like connecting with all of these people. Like, no, my grandma just died.
Mm,
And I could just allow myself to still resource within my environment in this other way, and just recognize that like, okay, this will move through me, this is part of
yep.
the cycle of life, and just kind of noticing how like nature is always cycling through things.
Mm-hmm.
Winter goes into spring, spring goes into summer, summer goes into fall, and like this is
Mm-hmm.
just part of being alive.
Yep.
And I love that idea of like turning it into ritual devotion.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it just became a thing where now I actually have someone to talk to every day. I would talk to my grandmother every day after she passed, and in some ways I feel like closer to her, because again, that love didn't have like a human person to go to anymore.
Totally.
So I created another place for that love to go. And whatever you believe, I essentially was channeling my love for her into a different ritual, into a different activity, into a different form.
Totally.
And that's ultimately what helped me move through that loss in an
Mm-hmm.
environment that wasn't ideal for me either.
Totally. And I think, yeah, it's like the worst thing we can do when this is coming up is try to stop it.
Mhm.
You can't stop a flowing river. You just can't. And if you do, and the water stops moving, it becomes really murky and cloudy and gross, right? And then we start to feel gross and we start to feel foggy and we start to feel all of those things. And also I say that and I'm like, actually the worst thing you can do is judge anything that you're doing. Sometimes grief does take there's like delayed grief. Maybe you don't have the room or the space to process it, your life circumstances. It's like you have to trust your body and trust that the the emotions will start to move through when you have space, but also you do have a responsibility to tend to it. So like for me, I think I kind of mentioned this, but this is something that I was thinking a lot about was like, because I had this kind of automatic response for a long time to suppress and repress, which I think we all do in some degree because life is very busy, like to repress our emotions. Sometimes we're not paying attention to the ways that maybe heartbreak or disappointment or these different things can show and manifest. It starts out like a little knock on the door, maybe like through a frustration, more subtle ways, right? Ooh, you feel a little bit of a stuckness in your body. Maybe you feel a little bit of a pain in your shoulder or a tightness in your gut, or you're a little bit scattered. All of these things that we're pretty used to feeling, honestly, which are ultimately, I think, just manifestations of not paying attention to our emotions and our feelings and the energy within us. So there was a lot of that happening within me for like a week or two. And then I just was like, whatever. I don't really have time to deal with you. And it was just this automatic response to kind of push it down. And then all of a sudden it was like that knock got way louder, way louder, way louder to the point that like I was just feeling so stuck. Like I couldn't really move. I didn't want to do the things I wanted to do. And then I was really forced to sit with it. So ultimately, like whether or not we stuff this feeling down or we avoid it, it's going to come back around and it's going to show itself. Like just because we avoid something or repress it does not mean that it goes away. It will come back stronger and it morphs. So I say all of that because you're going to have to feel it at some point. But I think this is where for me, like writing has been so impactful. It's like I make a ritual every single day out of writing every morning about what's going on inside of me. And within that, like it gives anything a chance to come to the surface and a chance for me to then figure out like what emotions are moving through me, what messages they have for me. And it gives me then a chance to tend to those things. And I think ultimately that's the best thing you can do too when you are grieving something, is to give it space for it to come to the surface, and give your heart space to speak. And ultimately, like, our heart will lead us exactly where we need to go. And asking yourself, maybe one day you just need to lay in bed, and that's okay. Allow it to move in that way, and just pay attention and don't judge what your body needs or what it's telling you that it needs.
Yeah. Yeah. So as I think about what we've been talking about to kind of bring it home for our audience, right? So first, it's helpful to just think of the way every day we have versions of grief, disappointment, and heartbreak, like that kind of meta, and this might be something that you don't do in acute grief, but maybe if you're listening and you're not currently in some kind of acute grief, heartbreak, disappointment, maybe taking a step back and just using this as an opportunity to examine, like, when an idea or a person or a situation or a belief changed, like what was as you moved through that disappointment, as you moved through that grief or that heartbreak, what came on the other side, right? And so starting to just have a relationship with grief and heartbreak and disappointment that maybe is more of a resource, just getting that like bigger picture. And that's where working with like a coach, a therapist, a healer can really help you transform it, because I just feel like this is a topic that we're not taught how to look at it, right?
At all.
So just like, if you're not in acute grief or heartbreak right now, like this is just a good thing to start to contemplate, to journal about, to talk to a mentor about, to talk to your friends about. Like I've even talked to people about the grief of, like, for example, phases of life, like becoming a mother, you grieve the life before that. Your kids go to school. I'm just using this as like an example because I have like one friend who's a new mother and another friend whose daughter's going to college. Like these are all life transitions can create grief. So just having a relationship with grief as a natural part of the cycle of life. Like one thing begins, another thing ends, and just seeing everything as a cycle, which will kind of make grief, heartbreak, and disappointment a little bit more palatable when it comes in these heavier forms, like death, or the end of an important relationship, or the end of a business, or a cycle that's like really big and impactful. Is just starting to recognize where these cycles are always happening in your life. And then the second thing that we've kind of been talking about is just allowing whatever you're doing in that acute shock to just be what it is without judgment. To just embrace it, let it wash over you. Whether you go and talk to people for support, or you journal, or you sit with it, or you do somatic release, like whatever that is. And then the third main thing I'm hearing is like patience for the process. Like time, space, grace, time, space, grace for the process of allowing the emotion to move through you. And yeah, maybe some people, they jump off into the next thing, but leaving time and space for the emotion to still come up. I was talking to someone, I think it was last week, about the idea of making time to purge emotion, right? And like, I feel like if you think about like your emotional body as like your home is a metaphor for it, right? Like, every morning and every night you might tidy, you might do the dishes, you might do certain things every day, but once or twice a month, maybe you do a deep clean or a purge, or you go into that closet and you really like look in the closet and excavate a corner of the closet. And so it's the same with our emotional life. So,
Totally.
but those are kind of the three kind of main things that I think will help with this topic. Is there anything else I'm missing that we've talked about, or anything
No,
you
I
want
think
to
you,
add?
I think you summarized it perfectly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome. Well, on this topic, you
Hmm.
do like to talk about someone who is in the public,
Hmm.
who is kind of embodying the inner radiant authentic energy as related to the topic or not. And I was kind of thinking about this tarot book and the way that tarot helps me move through this. But I'm curious for you, Katie, is there anyone kind of that you turn to as a resource with this topic?
There are multiple, but the one that's coming to mind that I feel like I have to speak to because it's right there on the tip of my tongue, is a musician. And music, to me, I'm just going to preface this, music is emotion. It helps us move emotion. I turn to music. It has been like my best friend in all different periods of time in my life. If you are experiencing any of what we've been talking about, or if you have experienced what we've been talking about and haven't been able to fully move through it, I would highly suggest listening to an artist. His name's Dermot Kennedy, and his music goes to the depths and it reaches your soul in a way that I haven't really experienced with a lot of other artists. And he sings about heartbreak and loss and love and the passing of time and how to fall into relationships and nature and your environment to hold the parts of your heart that are grieving. And I think he's done a beautiful job at remaining incredibly authentic to himself and also just providing a container for people's souls to heal and feel less alone in going through heartbreak. So check him out if you haven't. And it's also funny because he's Irish and I just got back from Ireland. So
Yeah.
connections all around.
Oh, and we'll link the way you can find him in the show notes.
Yeah.
So thank you, Katie, for such a wonderful, quick little episode on a very, very big, heavy topic.
Yeah.
We really hope that you got something out of this episode today. So please share this with people, rate us, spread it on socials. We would love to hear your thoughts and your feedback about how you resonated with this episode. And
Yeah.
we'll be back next week with another great topic.
Yes, we will. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.